the bottom line with this young man right here, Psychosis, is opportunity knocking on his door. Dean Malenko knows more holds than anybody in the industry ever. Period, Brain, ever.
And he says he's a man of 1,000 holds.
What did I just say?
I don't believe that. He knows 5,000 holds. That's what I'm talking about.
Oh.
I don't think there are 5,000 holds in wrestling, actually.
Well, he can come up with 4,000 more, I'll guarantee you.
This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Well, you saw about 35 moves right there in like 7 seconds.
This guy is Silver King. If he wins 12 more matches, he'll be upgraded to Golden King.
Hey, while you're up there, could you change the lights?
He may be able to. He got up so high.
El Dandy, I think you're a heck of a wrestler. You're a great technician in the ring, and you're a jam-up guy.
But I am, however, 235 pounds of twisted steel and sex appeal. And Rufus, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Here comes Rey Mysterio! Right into your living room!
Grab your plunder and open the pay window. It's time for Survey Says.
Welcome again to the greatest night in the history of our industry. It's an industry built upon anatomical hot takes, obnoxious insider references, all-around jackassery from your fine hosts here at Survey Says. This week, we're live from, I feel like it has to be the Alamodome in San Antonio, given the topic of tonight's show. I don't know, that might be racist, actually. I'll need a second opinion on that. Does that sound right to you, Andy?
Well, I was going to say, like, Tijuana, because we have to get down to Mexico before Trump builds a wall.
Oh.
Really racist, probably.
Oh, well, I mean, I guess it would be appropriate. I didn't know if we could cross the border necessarily or not to run this show, but that is awfully topical in a rather depressing way. In any case, I am, as always, Tim the Toolman Capel. The voice you heard to my left was the Mark of the Quad Cities himself. That's Mr. Andy Savage Helene. Andy, how are you feeling on this evening?
I'm feeling great because I really missed you, Tim.
You said you did. That really warmed my heart too. That was nice of you. That made me really look forward to this show all the more, as I always do. But we've had a longer break than we typically have between shows. Not that you will tell in the actual production itself. We'll still drop on time, I'm sure, because we're professionals like that. But it's been a bit more of a gap than we're used to having here, because this is becoming quite a regular happening. Like last month, we are bringing to you a 3-man booth, and I am thrilled to introduce a very special guest. Joining us, prominent Place to Be Nation contributor. He is 1/3 of the smash hit Clotheslines and Headlines. He's a Wisconsin 10, and he's an all-around jam-up guy, Steve Wille. Steve, do you feel that you're at 100% of your podcasting prowess, or have the powers that be rushed you back to action way too soon?
I do think that they rushed me back a little too quick. I'm still scarred up. I have hair on my knee has not grown back all the way yet. I had some Nurse Ratchet shaved me bald. It's been a rough ride, but I did bring along my cats today. It is a WCW podcast, so I've dressed him up in various gear. He's dressed up with a little sombrero today. I've renamed him Pepe, particularly for this podcast. Hey, baby.
It sounds like we're in good company then. Is one of them called Wildcat Willie?
Yes, that's my brother.
Excellent. Well, in that case, I guess the FedEx package that I had with your release papers in them that we were momentarily going to dispatch, I can now recall. So that's good. I'm glad you're feeling better, but I'm sorry that you had Nurse Ratchet put the screws to you like that. But in all seriousness, thanks for taking the time to chat with us here tonight while you're laid up.
Oh, I'm back and ready to go.
This is going to be a bit of a change of pace for you, right, from your usual gig. The timing, though, I actually just realized is kind of fortuitous. On the eve of this here recording, we are upon the debut of the new WWE Network series 205 Live. That's a show centered on their new Cruiserweight division. So, as luck would have it, on this episode of Survey Says, we're throwing it back to what I think kind of catapulted the notion of Cruiserweight wrestling into the mainstream collective consciousness of North American wrestling. And that is indeed what we're going to be talking tonight, the WCW Cruiserweight division. Before we get into all of that, we ask all of our guests to kind of give their WCW origin stories, but more pointedly to you, Steve, you and Andy kind of have a more personal history, right? So we've never actually met in person, but you and Andy have and hung out on a few occasions. Andy, I guess I'll ask you, how exactly did you make Steve's acquaintance, and what are some of the adventures that you guys have had over the years?
Well, the first time was about 4.5 years ago, and I was even thinking about that like yesterday, because it was we went up to Chicago, and we saw Ring of Honor and Shakara. It was like a double bill on a show, and I think it was like an impromptu thing, because he messaged me on Facebook like a week or 2 weeks before and said, hey, you want to take an extra ticket and join him and his buddies? And I was like, oh yeah, sure. So it was pretty cool. And then we've done that a couple other times, and we've even met up for a concert too, Foo Fighters.
Yes. Yeah. 4.5 years ago, my God.
Yeah.
The time goes by. Yeah, and we had the superpower handshake.
Yeah.
In the Ring of Honor parking lot that still pops out from time to time. And I remember you buying the Young Bucks TNA picture off of them, which they autographed for free, and it cost you all of $5.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I remember that because if you go to a Ring of Honor show now and they're signing, it costs $30 to get their autograph.
Oh, damn.
So you got in on the ground floor on that one.
And good for them.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I remember you even met El Generico, and now he's like big in WWE.
Well, El Generico retired in Tijuana, so it is good that we're there. He runs an orphanage down there, but he does bear a resemblance to Sami Zayn.
Yeah, they got to get them together in the same ring. They got to have a match. That would really blow the roof off of the Alamo Dome or wherever, whatever open air arena we're in Tijuana, where there is no roof.
And El Generico, little known fact, smells really bad. Bad body odor. Like we saw him at that show. I saw him at a Chikara show later. Both times, not smelling well.
I mean, had he just finished a match, or was he about to compete?
First time, but second time, no, it was before the show. First time, I can't recall if that was between shows that we saw them.
All right.
But it was very odd because he was wearing a flannel shirt and an El Generico mask. Very bizarre look. The lumberjack luchador.
Not a guy. Lumberjack. Not a guy I would think of as having a problem like that. Although I have mentioned in texts in passing to Andy that good old Michael Hayes is one of those guys. He looks like he smells like an old shoe. And so you just wonder, meeting some of these people in person, if you might get a little bit more than you bargained for, no matter what they're charging for their autographs. So interesting fun fact there. And our first hot take of the evening, I feel like.
Sorry, I confused El Generico with Sami Zayn, because I remember Greg had told me that the Big Show is the Giant. So I guess I thought, they were one and the same. So I guess I'll blame that on Greg.
Who's Paul White then? Oh, that's the Godfather.
Oh, Nate Milton. All one and the same. And of course, we all came together on the old RSPW FA2 live journal. You, like Greg Phillips, Steve, are one of our great compatriots there. So it's like a regular reunion here on Survey Says. Whenever we have a guest, it seems like it's going to be somebody from the old board. We've all sort of moved on and migrated and fit together in different configurations now, but it's still one big happy family, and it's a bigger family. That's why I love Place to Be Nation for that opportunity to just keep the dream alive. But in any case, we need to get to your WCW origin story, Steve. I don't know much about your past as a wrestling fan. I know that you attended ECW shows like kind of in the mid 90s, right? Like 96, 7-ish?
A little bit later. I think they came to the Midwest around 98 after the first pay-per-view.
Okay.
Is when they started being shown in Chicago and well, I was in Milwaukee at the time. I think it showed up in Milwaukee a little bit later. But I am on the network in several parts. As I was kind of preparing for the show a little bit, I went back to all the WCW shows that I went to, and I went to like 5 or 6, and realizing that, oh my gosh, these are all on the network. I could, except for one, I could probably go back and watch all these and see if they were actually any good.
Was one of them a Thunder?
I thought there was a Thunder, but it turns out that they were either Clash of the Champions or Nitros, with the exception of one very bizarre house show that I can talk about.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, yeah, what is that bizarre house show? I have to hear. For some reason, it seems like a theme that I did not know existed until recently, with WCW running their house shows, and they seem like they were a little bit of a different breed than WWF house shows of the same time period. This is an education I've been getting listening to Between the Sheets with Chris and David Bixenspan. So I definitely would like to hear what was your take and your experience at this house show.
Well, I went to school at Marquette University, which is in downtown Milwaukee. So I was very blessed that there were a lot of venues right around within walking distance of the school. And in 95, which was my freshman year, they had all of a sudden out of nowhere had like little ads in the Onion, which was just a newspaper that at that point that WCW was coming to town. So it was literally 4 blocks away from our dorm. So we went into this venue, and Andy, I don't know if how many times you've been up to Milwaukee for concerts, but it's called the Rave in the Eagles Auditorium, which is this really old building that my wife's grandparents used to go to swing dances in the 40s too. I think it's been around since the 20s. They did have some ECW pay-per-views from there in the late 90s, which had a lot more people than were at this house show in Milwaukee. There was, according to Graham Cawthon's site, thehistoryofwwe.com, there were 1,500 people there, which, I've gone to Ring of Honor shows that have that many people there.
Wow.
And it had not really been renovated yet. So the thing that I remember the most, and my friend who went with me and I laugh about it to this day, there was this old dilapidated couch, not to be confused with a dilapidated boat.
I was about to ask. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean that can protect you from things. And this was just in the middle of the arena, this old worn out couch for no apparent reason.
What the hell?
And yeah. And like we sat on it. It was disgusting. But they never took it away. The seats were it was kind of towards the back. And so auditorium is up. There's the Rave, which is a little concert hall, and then there's actually a place in the basement. And so I don't even remember many of these matches. So I can go through the card real quick. It was TV champion Arn Anderson defeated Johnny B. Bad. I remember Arn Anderson being there because he also interfered in the main event, and he also looks like my father. Then Marcus Alexander Bagwell and the Patriot defeated Steve Austin, who was substituting for Bobby Eaton and Lord Steven Regal. So 2 of my favorite guys, Austin and Regal. I have no recollection of this whatsoever. I was not a drinker at this point in my life, so there's no excuse. Alex Wright defeated Paul Roma. Not the first time I'd seen Paul Roma live at this point in my life. Harlem Heat defeated the Nasty Boys in a no disqualification match. I remember that Stevie Ray, I tried to put my hand out to give him a 5, and Stevie Ray slapped me away and told him not to ever touch him. That was scary. He's a large man.
Yeah, scary dude.
Yeah, he's a very scary dude. Vader, who was the U.S. champion at the time, just destroyed Hacksaw Jim Duggan.
Nice.
And that's so funny because on our second show, our Starcade, our kind of speed run through all the Starcades, we talked about that 95 Starcade where Jim Duggan basically gets a lot of shine on Vader, and an actually pretty good match for 1995 Jim Duggan, but at the same time, you're thinking, it's Vader, come on, just squash this guy. So that was one I never understood at the time. So you said this house show, it was also in 95, so I take it would have been earlier in the year than
February.
Than that. So, okay, wow.
And then the main event, which...
So that was actually the 94 Starrcade, excuse me.
Yeah, so this would have been after that. It was Savage and Sting teaming together, which, like, at that point, like, super cool dream team. But in the main event, they went up against Avalanche and Big Bubba, which is not a main event.
No.
That's like a Saturday night special right there.
That's like a worldwide main event.
I think that was a Super Brawl match, Super Brawl 95.
That sounds kind of right, yeah. On one of those 95 pay-per-views, there was a Sting Savage tag against kind of Dungeon of Doom type guys. Interesting. So that was that your first WCW show, I take it?
That was my first live show I went to. Yeah, I'd watched, like growing up outside of Chicago, we had access to a lot of different stuff on TV, even just on local stations. So, like, I remember NWA being on the UHF channels, and I remember that our library would have, like, the Great American Bash VHS. It was, like, from 85 and 86. So I would check that out a couple times because it was, like, a lot different than what WWF was. Like, oh, this is bloody, and it's dark, and it's grungy, and there's Jimmy Valiant looking fat and hairy. Like, it was just a completely different presentation. So it was always interesting to me, like, to see all the different styles of wrestling. We also got World Class, from Texas, so that was a completely different style too. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of a fun place to grow up. But I did not know anyone else who watched wrestling.
It's a little bit lonely.
Yeah.
Having that one thing that you're into and you can't really share with anyone else.
And I recently learned that someone I went to high school with, who I actually was on a team with for many years, was watching wrestling at this time with some of his friends. He was a couple years older than me. And, like, we're old now and just found this out. And he lives and the only reason I found out was that he lived in Texas, and he, like, his pastor is the ring announcer from World Class Championship Wrestling. So the guy who, I don't know if you've ever watched World Class on the network, but it's like a Mark Lawrence, I think his name is, and, like, his very famous voice, and that is my friend's pastor now. So he got a big kick out of, like, sending me the picture.
That's wild. Small world, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So you also attended some Nitros, you said. Any standout notable matches or events from those shows?
Yeah, I went to a Clash first, but the Nitros, it was actually on the day of my 22nd birthday. My friend group, who actually Andy has hung out with, we all took a trip down to the United Center to see Nitro for my birthday, went out for pizza and kind of ditched out of school and stuff. It is infamous for having the Chris Jericho list of 1,004 holds.
Oh, man. You got to see that show. And again, what timing, right? Jericho bringing back the list, not exactly the same fashion, but typical Chris Jericho chicanery.
Yeah, and it was so fun because he had, like, the old school printer pasta paper that was,
yes.
As opposed to now he just has a nice clipboard. He was just, like, unrolled it. And during the commercial break, which no one ever saw, he kept going.
That's what I've heard.
And he kept doing the armbar.
Armbar, yes.
Yeah, he did it several more times. And I don't know if reversed Elvis thrust kick made it through. There'll have to be but that was one of our favorites.
Unreal.
It was also during the Booker T. Chris Benoit Best of 7 series as well. So that was kind of...
That's nuts. You saw one of those too, didn't you, Andy?
Yeah, then they probably would have been in about the same area because they came to Peoria for a Thunder, and it was when Jericho... Dean Malenko was supposed to give the belt back to Jericho, but he hit him in the face with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that would have been... just maybe a couple weeks apart.
Yeah, or maybe like a day apart. It's usually the way that goes. It's kind of weird. Like bands always hit Peoria on the way to Chicago, or I guess on the way to Milwaukee.
Yeah, with you guys kind of living in the same vicinity, it makes sense that if they ran one show in one of your neighborhoods, then the next would probably be right behind it. All right. Well, I'm trying to think of why we wanted you for this show, Steve, other than just wanting you to be on the show. Because, like I said, you are a jam-up guy. But I mean, when I think cruiserweight wrestling, I think Steve Wille, right? It just seems like the kind of thing that you would be a good fit to talk about. That I think you maybe have some passion for and might have some strong views on.
I think I've always been drawn to this kind, and it was of wrestling, the cruiserweight wrestling, and it really was the WCW cruiserweights that opened my eyes to it. Like I said, I didn't get to see ECW, so I didn't see like Malenko and Eddie and Ray and Psychosis do their stuff in ECW. But when they started popping up on Nitro, and even before that, like, you know, when you had Pillman and Liger in the early 90s, you know, I think it was the light heavyweight championship back then.
Yeah.
Like that stuck out to me as like, whoa, these guys can fly. They can do stuff that I could never imagine doing. And like, I've always been kind of mesmerized by that. So one of my favorite wrestlers is Randy Savage, because he was one of the first guys in WWF that I saw that really took to the air, you know, doing the double sledgehammer from the top rope to the floor. Like, no one did that kind of stuff back then.
And was just so light on his feet. Like, he made that stuff seem so effortless. And for a guy his size, that was just really impressive. I mean, you'd see like a Tito Santana do some kind of aerial maneuvers with like cross bodies and stuff like that, but it always just seemed more impressive from a guy like Savage, who again was bigger, but also had the charisma and just did overall flashier moves. You know, that's sort of what you want to see in a wrestling match. That's what you're going to pop for. Is that just that one big flashy move, whether it's a finisher or just something out of nowhere that you didn't expect. But I'm glad you did mention sort of the early years, the prototypical years of the cruiserweight division, so to speak, with WCW's early efforts in having a light heavyweight championship. Because I went back a couple weeks ago just to watch matches here and there from that era, and it really was just the Brian Pillman show, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Starting from the early 90s, like in 91, they had that tournament to crown the first ever WCW light heavyweight champion. And it came down to Pillman and Richard Morton. And it was sort of matches like that until Liger came into the picture in late 91. I know that he and Pillman had some non-televised matches. They did some good stuff on house shows. There's supposedly a legendary match from the Meadowlands Arena that everyone talks about, but like no one has ever seen except on probably a crappy, you know, handheld camcorder footage. But what most people probably think of is their Super Brawl 2 match, 92, which really was like the first time you saw a legit, holy crap, this is a 4-star North American wrestling match between two guys who could just go. Not to say there had never been great matches before, but just the level of athleticism that you saw from them, and not in the typical kind of main event style. Do you have any recollections on that match, or just Pillman and Liger series in particular?
I didn't have access to pay-per-view back then, but I would see the build-up to it, and I remember seeing highlights of the first match on one of the syndicated shows when Liger beat him at some house show. Like that, I think I remember seeing like the finish of it. But yeah, Pillman to that point really didn't have a chance to show off a lot of his cruiserweight style type stuff, because he was a big guy too. I mean, he was pretty jacked.
Thing. He was sort of a hybrid where you'd see him in matches against guys like Liger, but at the same time, he could be programmed against Lex Luger, and because they had a series of matches, or even Norman the Lunatic of all people, and he's throwing him around. So, and that was the funny thing is the light heavyweight championship back then, the weight limit, it seemed like they couldn't make up their minds what it was supposed to be. At first, it was announced at like 236 pounds, which sounds awfully arbitrary. And then it was like, no, it's 235. And I think they stuck with that for a little bit. And then later, when we got the cruiserweight division proper, it was, the old 225. So it was like they were doing these things, it seemed like, to accommodate Liger, not so much Liger, but Pillman and guys that he was programmed against. But you're right in that he could float between the divisions pretty easily. But because he could work that style so well, you sort of had to give him that showcase and build something around him.
Right. And then they switched to Scotty Flamingo, Raven.
Oh yeah,
that was not someone again you associate with being a cruiserweight.
No, and what a strange. Andy, have you seen any of this early light heavyweight WCW stuff?
I think it was Beach Blast when he wrestled Pillman.
It sure was. Yeah, he actually took the title from Pillman there, and evidently it then went to Brad Armstrong. Not sure if he was still Brad Street, whatever you want to call him at that time. But just at a house show, took it off Flamingo, and then that was it. The title was vacated September of '92, which I guess could have been a tumultuous time period for WCW, although that's not saying much because many of them were. 92 I think of as being the year of Kip Fry, but by September, was he out of the picture by then?
Yeah, that was Bill Watts at that point.
Bill Watts had come in by that point, so maybe this just got lost in the shuffle. I don't know.
Can't go off the top rope,
I was going to say, that's going to be a killer for the division right there. So don't think old Bill Watts had a lot of affinity for a light heavyweight division. So no great surprise that it fell by the wayside. And that was kind of the last word on light heavyweight or cruiserweight wrestling in WCW until '96. Thanks to Wikipedia, I'm told that Shinjiro Otani defeated Wild Pegasus at an NJPW live event. We, of course, know who Wild Pegasus is, he who shall not be named, right? And that was a tournament final. Otani becomes the new and I guess first ever cruiserweight champion. Dean Malenko, he took the title from Otani on a worldwide, I guess, taping. Looks like this might have been one of the Disney shows. It was in sort of mid-'96. It seemed like that the Cruiserweight title became the Malenko, Ray Jr., Ultimo Dragon show. Sort of the usual suspects. That's when you start to see them coming into the picture. And that is what I think of as really the WCW Cruiserweight division, which lasted until mid 1999, thereabouts. I guess we can get into this, and I'll throw this to both of you guys. Andy first, from this sort of mid 1996 time period, some of the cruiserweight matches we were seeing at the time, again, the Dean Malenkos, the Ray Juniors. I know you're kind of a big Ultimo Dragon guy. Any matches from that time span stand out in your mind, or any guys that just seem to stand head and shoulders above the rest?
Ultimo Dragon, he was the one that really kind of hooked me on cruiserweights and even WCW kind of in late '96.
Right.
There was a lot, I guess, I hadn't seen until recently when I got the network, because I missed a bunch of those pay-per-views that were in the fall. Mm-hmm. But really, what hooked me was his series with Malenko and even the Clash of the Champions. It's probably the one I think that Steve was at. I think that might have been a Milwaukee one where.
Yeah, that was the last Clash of Champions. That was kind of a last minute thing where I'm like, man, you know what? I'm going to go to this. I didn't have anyone else to go to. And it was just literally just right down the street, like a mile away. So I did. I got to see the huge dark match of Ice Train versus Mark Starr. Those are cruiserweights, right? No.
Yeah, well, depends on what the weight limit was by then, I suppose. Maybe if it's still 1991. Well, that's a pretty good segue then. The thing about Ultimo that was so cool, of course, he had all of the belts, and I think they couldn't even necessarily legally have. I don't remember what championship it was, but he had a title that they were kind of skittish about actually showing on television because they thought they could get in some legal hot water with some, I don't know, some NWA promotion at the time that he had one of their championships. I'm far from an expert on, the title lineage and what specific belts he actually held. I mean, he just looked like a badass, actually coming out to the ring draped in gold, basically. I think that the heel Ultimo Dragon, who was managed by Sonny Ono, probably my favorite version of the character. I think he worked better as a heel because he was someone who he seemed like he was never really big on selling, but when he was on offense, he looked really good, which is something that some face cruiserweights kind of struggle with. The offense can be a little bit shaky. He looked like he would really mess dudes up. So Ultimo Dragon, just as a heel with all the belts, with Sonny Ono, that's definitely and I know that was early in his WCW run, but that was kind of his peak for me. And he's a guy that opinions seem kind of varied on. I've heard some folks go as far as to say he was overrated, but I've kind of been of the opinion that he's underrated. I don't know. Maybe I just didn't see enough of him to really get a good feel one way or another. What do you think, Steve, when it comes to Ultimo and the run he had?
Well, he was a guy he would go kind of in and out in between Japan and WCW quite a lot during this time period. But I did look up the titles he had. It was because it was from the J Crown, which was like a big way to unify all the titles. And probably the one that was not good that he had was the old WWF Light Heavyweight Championship.
That's what I'm thinking of. Which he probably won in Mexico, right?
Yeah, and that wasn't even. El Samurai had it, so they kind of had this tournament to combine everything. So it was the British Commonwealth Junior Heavyweight Championship, which was Michinoku Pro. That was Liger. The IWGP Junior Heavyweight, that was Great Sasuke. NWA, like you said, that was Masayoshi Motegi. I don't know who that is. The World Welterweight title, which was in CMLL, that was Negro Casas. Shinjaro Otani, which we talked about, Ultimo Dragon, Gran Hamada from, I'm more used to him in Michinoku Pro, but it was from World Wrestling Association, and El Samurai had the WWF Light Heavyweight Championship. And I remember hearing, it might have been on one of Chris Jericho's podcasts, that the Japan workers were huge marks for the belts. Mm-hmm. So they would always have these kind of pointless belts that they would kind of co-opt. Because the light heavyweight championship from WWF, I mean, that wasn't really around since the 80s. But they still evidently had it going around the horn in Japan.
And it's it's kind of hilarious how they sort of just let it go or forgot about it, because what were they really doing with it? And it still gets defended. It just randomly gets defended and changes hands between guys working shows in Mexico or wherever.
Well, as a little bit of a tie-in to the Cruiserweight show, Hornswoggle lives by me. We have mutual friends. Oh. And I know he just got let go a few months ago, but as early as this year, I don't know if he still does, but he still has the Cruiserweight Championship. because he was the last Cruiserweight championship, and he's still in possession of the belt. Like, they never got it back. He might have had to give it back after he was let go.
That's outstanding. I hope they just forgot about it. I said it would never happen today, but maybe.
Yeah, it was literally just laying around.
Found it in a trash can like Jim Duggan with the TV championship.
And probably at this point, Jim Duggan himself.
Are you serious? Are you like friends with Hornswoggle?
I've talked with him several times. He actually has a promotion in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. They actually have their big year-end show this Friday, December 2nd. So if anyone's in the Wisconsin area, come to Oshkosh. But no, I have more mutual friends with him. Not like buddies with him by any means, but quite a few mutual friends.
Well, you'll have to find out if he does still have physical possession of that belt, but don't tell anyone. I'd just keep that close to the vest. So, again, just looking at this still early period in the Cruiserweight Championship division, it seemed like every other pay-per-view was either like Malenko versus Mysterio, or Malenko versus Dragon, or Dragon versus Mysterio. And in a way, the matches do sort of blur together, but they're all really good.
Oh, yeah.
I want to say it was at Hog Wild 1996. There was a Ray Dragon match that was really surprisingly outstanding, especially for that venue. That was the same show that had a Malenko Benoit match, which is just crazy, ridiculously stupid good. It goes something like 30 minutes. They went to a time limit draw like a couple of times and were given 5 more minutes just, for shits and grins. And this is in front of an audience that could give 2 craps about work rate or the match they're seeing between these two. There's no real storyline. I mean, Benoit was in the Horsemen. Malenko had kind of gotten sucked into that storyline. It never really went anywhere. But it's just like, it almost felt like work rate trolling of an audience that doesn't care about that sort of thing, because it's just a stupidly great match that I guess they wanted to go out there and make a point or something, but just gets tons of time, nonstop action from bell to bell. And you've got that, and like I said, the Mysterio and Ultimo Dragon match for the Cruiserweight title. Just these two probably takes up a good hour's worth of that show on, Sturgis 1996 in front of a crowd of bikers. I mean, where there's no gate, they're not making anything off of the live show. One of the more unique ideas from Eric Bischoff, but it's just so funny how random shows like that could produce such great and memorable matches.
And if you threw like any like Nitro or I don't remember when Thunder started, like 98 maybe, late 97, or even Saturday Night at the time, you'd always get Cruiserweight matches that would, steal the show, and they were the highlight. And it's one of the main reasons why people started to go away from Raw and go to WCW. It wasn't just the NWO stuff. It had better action.
Yeah, and that's the thing I was kind of getting at, is that it seemed like because there was so much depth to WCW's talent roster, we can have at least a 3-star match per show. Usually you could do a lot better than that. And it might come down to something like, oh crap, Steve Mongo McMichael missed his flight. He's not going to be here. We need to fill 25 minutes. So, hey, Eddie Guerrero, hey, Ultimo Dragon, go out there and have a match for 25 minutes. And that's the type of stuff that would produce just some incredible performances. We talk about sort of taking it for granted today that you always have these awesome matches week in and week out. You get kind of almost bored by it, but WCW was doing that back then with their cruiserweights, where they could just take random guys, throw them together, and even if there was no real storyline thrust behind it, was going to give you a classic. So that's something that definitely sticks out in my mind as well when I think back to the appeal to the division.
We were talking about this period in like 96 into 97 with Malenko and Ray and Dragon, how they kept like, it was like pairing off those two guys or those three guys.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that like watching some of these matches on the network recently, that there are almost like the longest match on the card, and they open the show too. So it's like they're giving them, like you guys said, like 25 minutes on a pay-per-view. That's kind of unheard of now.
Yeah, I mean, they would get tons of time. That's something that definitely you don't get today, I don't think, with the Cruiserweight division on Raw, such as it is. And, of course, WWE, WWF has never exactly shown the commitment to Cruiserweight / light heavyweight wrestling that WCW did. That's probably a somewhat different discussion we can get into, but these matches always...
Be careful, I'm going to get fired up because that's what's happening currently.
Good. This is what we want. But yeah, these matches would just get tons of time. And like you said, Andy, they would open the show, really get the crowd pumped. And even if people were buying tickets to see the main event, the old rundown Age in the Cage type stuff, maybe that did sell tickets and get by, sure. But your anchor, I think, was the Cruiserweights, among other things. I mean, they had a solid mid-card until you got into that main event scene. WCW was a solid product, a solid show, but Cruiserweights were a huge part of that, just that foundation that they were able to build. Steve, you're getting worked up. Is there something you need to get off your chest?
Well, with the Cruiserweight division starting again in WWE this year, with the Cruiserweight Classic, it was a throwback almost to this era where they, on the network stuff, they were given 10, 15, 20 minutes to have these amazing matches and pull off moves that we've never seen before, which is what made the Cruiserweight division in WCW so fantastic. So silly me, bought into it. And we had a cool conversation in the last Close on Headlines about the new marks, about how like people like us are the new marks because we will buy the network and we get still sucked in because there's so much stuff. But I figured, hey, they're going to go to Raw. They have 3 hours. They're going to do these same type of matches, and within 2 weeks, they're doing 3 and 5 minute matches and. We're wondering, well, why are these guys not getting over and the crowds aren't interested?
Yeah.
Like, all they had to do was repeat the exact same thing that they were doing in the Classic, and they had, WWE fans eating out of their hands at that point.
I do wonder if it's a chicken and the egg kind of problem where they're now sort of watering it down, and that's putting it lightly, because the fans weren't really responding to it, or are the fans not responding to it because it's not being presented in the right way? It's hard to say, because there's an element of this is new. This whole presentation, the Cruiserweight Classic, just like you said, is something we have never seen on WWF, WWE mainstream television. So I think there's a process of having to retrain your audience to expect and appreciate that kind of thing, and maybe they would have come around, but because it is so tonally jarring from what you see week in and week out on Raw, it's gonna take a while, and maybe they just didn't give it the time to find its audience, for people to buy into what this was going to be presented as ultimately. And maybe they just pulled the ripcord too soon, as our good friend Clint Butler might say. But yeah, it's really rather disheartening the way that has kind of fizzled out so quickly. Maybe with 205 Live they'll actually get more of a proper showcase outside of just that Raw bubble, and that's maybe what they need. But it's a shame that like you said, it wasn't like the Nitros back in the day where you could have just that great opening match, and it's really a match, right? It's not a bunch of BS storyline stuff. It's not a 20-minute promo. It's just open with some action, get people fired up, and you're ready to move on to the rest of the show.
And they would do like they do the 6-man now, the random 6-man pairings, and that was kind of the secondary part of the fun of Nitro and Thunder back in the day. Is you had the great pay-per-view matches like we talked about, the Guerreros and the Malenkos and the Jerichos and Ray, but then they throw random pairings of 6-mans together, and sometimes it didn't make any sense who was face, who was heel.
Right.
They'd like switch from week to week, but they would just be insane. They would, and by the end of them, you would be in some like just some town in the middle of nowhere, because Nitro had a tendency in the earlier days to just show up in some odd places. And by the end of the match, you'd have people going crazy for these masked people who couldn't even speak English or cut a promo,
right?
Just by letting them unleash crazy moves and have Bobby Heenan go crazy on commentary.
And Dusty Rhodes at that.
Yeah, Dusty Rhodes as well.
Trying to call these matches.
What was that, Tony?
The Tsutamaki, as Greg Phillips' favorite call is. That was another thing that would crack me up is WCW, of course, Bobby Heenan was their color guy, but they had him. He would always do the match recaps. For whatever reason, they would show all their replays of the big spots leading up to the finish of every match, and he was the designated guy who would do that little recap. And anytime it was a cruiserweight or a lucha match, Heenan just struggling to get through the moves and try to describe the action and getting so frustrated, and almost felt like maybe it was a rib on Bobby having to do this, because you could tell like it's taking everything for Tony and Mike Tenay not to crack up as Heenan tries to go through this. But that was something that I think I didn't realize or appreciate as much until some of these recent rewatches I've done, is that they made Bobby do those like for every single match, and they had to get a kick out of it. So in any case, it seems like 1997 was not the best year for the then growing cruiserweight division, because you started out with Dean Malenko as champion, and then it went to 6. He won it in February at Super Brawl and hung on to the belt really through like June, when Jericho won it from him. It was Saturday Nitro. So it was a house show that they broadcast over the internet in 1997.
In
1997, yeah, as Saturday Nitro. So that was Chris Jericho's first reign. He drops it to Alex Wright, wins it back, and then finally it makes its way to Eddie Guerrero in the fall of 97. So, just looking at these championship reigns doesn't seem like really a high watermark for the division, which is a little bit surprising in 1997, given that you had arguably that year the greatest WCW match of all time, cruiserweight or not, with Ray and Eddie at Halloween Havoc. Thoughts on that match? You first, Andy. I don't know if we ever really even talked about that match, Ray and Eddie, mask versus title at Havoc 97, that really, in my mind, I'll come out and say is one of my all-time favorite matches, period, of any guys, any title, any promotion. I really do think that is a masterpiece. And I'm not even a big Rey Mysterio fan, like by any stretch. I am Eddie Guerrero, but Ray sort of doesn't do it for me. It kind of depends on the opponent, and this is still one of my favorite matches. Andy, what do you think? Overrated, properly rated, don't really care?
I actually didn't revisit that one in preparation for the show, but I do remember watching it a lot because I think it was on Eddie's DVD. It was on another DVD that came out. And I remember, like, Ray, he had some weird purple, like, full, like, bodysuit on. And, like, Eddie's trying to rip it off of him, rip off his mask and stuff. And that's mostly what I remember. Eddie, like, healing it up. And, like, Ray's, like, well, it just keeps, like, coming back.
Yeah, that was kind of Ray's first comic book costume where it wasn't a comic book character, but the Phantom had come out the summer of 96, I think. You remember that movie? Who was I guess he owed more to the old pulp strips than proper comic book superheroes, but it was a comic book movie before you really had comic book movies, and that's exactly how Ray was dressed. That was his outfit for this show. And it was funny, you're right, that the mask was sort of attached and almost part of the costume, so you wonder how he would have removed it had he lost that match. And as legend has it, he was originally booked or told to lose this match. Like, Bischoff wanted him to unmask here, and Ray flat out refused to do it. And Bischoff actually, again, allegedly, threatened him with breach of contract. I mean, really, like, kind of put the screws to him. And you got to figure Rey Mysterio in 1997 is all of 21 years old. And for him to stand his ground like that and basically call Bischoff's bluff, if that's what it came down to, is quite telling and quite the credit to the young Rey Mysterio Jr. And certainly that, I think, history proved that was the right choice for him not to lose his mask at that point. They still kind of forced him to go through with it, 2 years later. Maybe that was the deal or the bargain that they struck, that he would agree to lose it later on, but there's no way he was doing it that early in his career. So, Steve, I guess I'll take it over to you. What are your thoughts on that match? Are you as high on it as we are?
Oh, yeah. And it was, like you said, one of the best Cruiserweight matches or WCW matches of that WCW era, like post-NWA, before the buyout. And really had them, and they've had such great chemistry over the years, through WWE and even in Mexico before that. Mm-hmm. So it was, and what you said about the outfit too, like at the time, looking at that outfit, it looked terrible.
Yes.
But it looked like the spandex version of a onesie. And it's like, going forward though, to see him turn it into, when you get more money from WWF and WWE then later to make, comic book type outfits, you get the money behind it, it looks a lot better. But match wise, it's hard for me to, outside of this match, remember what matches took place when. And part of it I know is just age for me, but there are so many of them, and they were intertwined, and they were against each other so many different times that it's hard for any of them to stick out, except for that Halloween Havoc one.
Right, and that's why I call particular focus to it, because it is really the one that everybody remembers. For as many times as these guys, well, I guess Ray and Eddie didn't match up too often in WCW, but just the different permutations and different combinations of guys and how they work together. And like I said, they were all really pretty good. And there's some hidden gems in there for sure, but this is the one that it seems like everybody comes back to. And this is maybe the only match that I've literally never heard anyone have a negative opinion about. or say it was good, but I mean, it's flawless to me. It really is. There's not a single blown spot. Everything comes off super crisp. They do things that I would not think are possible in a wrestling ring. There's one move that stands out in particular when Ray is on the top rope. He does like a springboard, what looks like is going to be a moonsault, spins Eddie around because he's got him in like a arm drag at the same time, and hits a DDT, and it just looks perfect. And it seems like something that would be so easy to blow. Like how do you even coordinate something like that? And it just seems like sheer luck that they were able to pull it off. But it's just amazing to watch. And they did have the rematch the following month at I guess it was World War III, that certainly was not up to that level. But I don't know. It was just like there was magic in the air that night, I guess. There's just been nothing else to really come up to that level, I don't think. In any case, when you get into 1998, that is really the year that Chris Jericho arrived. We will take a deep dive into the Cruiserweight Championship reign of one Chris Jericho. But first, we've got some words from our sponsors. Stay with us, and we will be right back.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
Voice of Ring of Honor's Kevin Kelly here. I just want to make sure you're all subscribed to all of our great feeds here at Place to Be Nation. Now, it's really easy to do. Just head to iTunes or your preferred podcatcher app today and search for and subscribe to the Place to Be Nation wrestling feed, Place to Be Nation pop feed, Pro Wrestling Only feed, and of course, the Kevin Kelly Show feed, which includes the full archives of my podcast. Subscribe, listen, and then rate us and leave feedback today. And of course, as always, enjoy all the great action of Ring of Honor Wrestling and everything presented to you on PlaceToBeNation.com.
Place to Be Nation's JT Rozzero here, and I want to let you know that we have a ton of great podcasts available to you on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and PlaceToBeNation.com, and we offer them to you across two great feeds. On the Place to Be Nation wrestling feed, you can check out Scott Criscolo and me on the Mothership, the Place to Be podcast, with our famous Vintage Vault pay-per-view reviews. PTBN also covers current-day wrestling with the smash hit Clotheslines and Headlines, our steady veteran main event, and the beloved monthly pay-per-view reaction shows with immediate feedback on all pro wrestling super shows. Relive wrestling's past with our monthly pay-per-view rewind series led by Ben Morse, the always contentious Dangerous Alliance podcast, and Survey Says, a fun look back at the good, bad, and ugly of WCW. On our very popular Place to Be Nation Pop podcast feed, we offer such great shows as the Glenn Butler Podcast Hour Spectacular, Rank and File, NBA Team, Lucha Undead, Geek and Sassy, and a veritable podcast heaven for comic fans with hard-traveling fanboys, Sellers Points, Todd Weber's Conversation, and Imaginary Stories. Subscribe to both of those feeds on iTunes and rate and leave feedback for us as well. All of these shows, plus others, available at PlaceToBeNation.com, where we cover pro wrestling, sports, movies, comics, plus tournaments and more. Be sure to support our site by using PlaceToBeNation.com/Amazon when doing your online shopping, and download our free Place to Be Vintage Vault Refresh ebooks via the links on the right-hand side of our site. We also want to thank our friends at Boneheads Wing Bar in West Warwick, Rhode Island, and Fall River, Massachusetts, thehistoryofwrestling.com, and Scott Keats' Blog of Doom. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr as well. PlaceToBeNation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
The PWO PTBN feed has changed its name. Now it will be known simply as Pro Wrestling Only, so it should be easier to find and indeed to say. All of your favourite shows are still here, including Where the Big Boys Play, Letters from Kayfabe, Titans of Wrestling, Tag Teams Back Again, This Week in Wrestling, and many, many more, including our full archives of tremendous content. So make sure you subscribe to the Pro Wrestling Only feed today.
Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed your break. We're going to get right to it, continuing our show on the WCW Cruiserweight division, but we do have a little bit of business to take care of. I know we want to take a deep dive into the great reign of one Chris Jericho, where he finally and truly came into his own as a character. But first off, Andy, you reminded me that we need to give a quick shout out, a very important shout out at that. Andy, who is it that you'd like to call attention to coming into our second half here, who is not a WCW Cruiserweight, but who we would be remiss in not acknowledging?
Well, I will set the stage first, because Tim and I, we text a lot, and I was like, hey, I wonder if anybody outside of our circle of friends actually likes the show, because we've gotten feedback from a few of our buddies and some Nation guys who we're friends with. But I wasn't sure if anybody who we didn't know but was involved in Place to Be, maybe I had listened to it. And I noticed on one of the posts, I think it might have been Greeny, he posted our link on the Place to Be Facebook group thing. And somebody actually liked it, and it was a person named Coco Weaver. So I just want to say thank you, Coco Weaver, for liking our show.
Thank you, Coco Weaver. And I would like to nominate Coco Weaver as our WCW Survey Says Fan of the Month Club. So I think we should on the spot here, I've just called an audible, you guys. We should have a Survey Says Fan of the Month, and to be eligible, all you have to do is like one of our show posts on Facebook. Better if you comment, if you have something to say about it. Even better if you have a cool sounding name like Coco Weaver. But if you don't, you see the show posted, you listen to it, even if you didn't listen to it, but you like the post on Facebook, on social media, you can hit us up on Twitter as well. I'm at Psyche68, that's CYKE 68. Andy, you do not participate in that medium of social media, right? Allow myself to introduce myself. Andy, are you on Twitter?
No, I'm not, but I just started Instagram actually today.
Oh, well, I guess we could post a show on Instagram. Don't know how that would work, but in any case, the winner of the Survey Says Fan of the Month is Coco Weaver. So thank you, Coco. Thank you for having such a great name. Thank you for liking us on Facebook. Moving right along.
I'll put your prize in the mail, so you'll get that soon.
Yes, the no prize is on its way.
I just heard you drop the prize in the mail.
Yeah, that was...
I didn't know you lived directly next to a U.S. Postal Service mailbox. But,
it's a big prize, right? All right, gentlemen. So we are heading into the year 1998 now. Chris Jericho valiantly defeats Rey Mysterio Jr. at Sold Out for his third WCW Cruiserweight Championship. And this is where his heel run really takes off. And when you talk about the great character work done by Chris Jericho, this is where it all gets started. Talk about this run, gentlemen. This was some pretty next level stuff. Some great work Jericho was doing when he was more or less handed the reins of this division and allowed to do his own thing. Andy, let's start off with you. You've got some personal recollections of this, do you not?
You always throw it to me first. Why don't you be nice and throw it to our guests first?
Well, I thought I'd mix it up. We can do that, Steve. How about we'll go, since Andy shut that down, we'll kick it over to you.
Well, for a while he was this just happy-go-lucky babyface coming to the ring with his knockoff Pearl Jam music, and it was when he started throwing, I'll just call it a hissy fit after matches, where he started to turn heel. And was his feud with Guerrera first before Malenko?
Yes.
Hoovy?
So, yeah, he...
Quasimodo?
Yes, so he won the belt from from Mysterio and threw his hissy fit after the match. That's where Ray went out with the injury, and he was on the shelf for a few months because he was already injured going into the match, but they played it off like Jericho injured him, and quite brutal and deliberate fashion. And so that really completed the circle of his heel turn. In the weeks leading up to that, you would see him kind of snap after matches and just go after guys. He would famously push around David Pinzer at ringside, and then immediately apologize, say he was sorry. He doesn't know what came over him. And it was really in that Ray match where he seemed to finally embrace it and just leaned right into that character, because he left with the title. So he was like, obviously this is getting results. And it was after that he had the match with Juvi, Quasimodo, mask versus title, and that's where Juventud had to unmask and was christened as such. Jericho walked away with another trophy from that match. He stole the mask and carried it to ringside with him for some time thereafter. Of course, that led to then the match with Malenko at Uncensored, where Dean loses, and I believe Mean Gene refers to him as a bona fide loser, and sends old Dino Machino packing.
See, I would call him Stinko Malenko as a Jericho fan.
Right. And of course you get and this was like the most over Dean Malenko had ever been in his career in absentia. He's off television for the better part of a month, maybe two. Jericho is just kind of keeping the feud alive with his Man of 1,004 holds stuff, his Stinko Malenko and Boris Malenko. He's making fun of his father. Just all this like really petty shit that you think of as being like prime Chris Jericho, just that petulant asshole that he was and that he played so well. Sort of the Jericho that I think of when I look back on his career.
When you hear like him talking, I like to listen to his podcast from time to time, and I read the first couple of his books, but a lot of the stuff he was kind of doing on his own. Like he would purposely try to do stupid stuff in his interviews with Mean Gene once he got comfortable to get himself over, because they would just be told, hey, go out and throw out a match. And so he was trying to figure out ways to get himself over with the viewers at home. So he would just start being silly and calling people Quasimodo and JoJo and
JoJo Dillon. That one always cracked me up.
Yes, and it was like, yeah, just like those little ad-lib things that made the show worth watching, that made the interviews worth watching, instead of, back in those days, you had two shows going on at once, and my buddies and I would have two TVs on sometimes, and you have to, go back and forth or at least tape and fast forward. But a Jericho interview after he got comfortable was can't miss, because he'd always drop some sort of funny line in there, especially when he was a heel.
Yeah, and that's something I remember him talking about in, I think, his first book. You're right, is that Eric Bischoff, it sounded like he gave Jericho carte blanche in a way just to run the division. Not that he was necessarily booking it, so to speak, but it was like Bischoff had bigger fish to fry, so he would say, yeah, go out there, do your thing, I'm sure it'll be fine. It brought that element of character work and just charisma to what had been just a very, very work rate driven division up to that point. It's kind of cool that he had the opportunity to, like you said, get himself over. Andy, now we throw it to you. Were you a big Chris Jericho mark during this time period?
Well, now I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, see,
man, you are the Bobby Heenan of this broadcast right now.
What, drinking too much?
Having something and then coming back. I don't even remember anymore.
Actually, I do. I was just fooling you guys. Well, the thing with Jericho that always kind of stood out to me is that you guys said he said like silly stuff. Well, it was the cutting promos on the way to the ring, because you'd have guys that would kind of talk in the ring, maybe like Ravishing Rick Rude, like he'd like pipe down while I take my robe off and stuff. But you actually had Jericho who was like talking and cutting promos and either like saying stuff to the fans or saying stuff to his opponent, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's something I've kind of forgotten about too. You're right. It started from the moment he came out, from the curtain. He was pretty much on and never let up. And you get that great moment where Malenko comes back. He wins. Well, Synclope wins the Battle Royal at Slamboree in '98, and Jericho's like, okay, I've got this. Synclope, what a joke. He's already put away, of course, Rey Mysterio and Juventud, and had the little run with Prince Iaukea. What did he call him at the time? Prince
Nakimaki or not?
Yes.
That was all-time classic Jericho, just coming up with nicknames and that's another one I got to go back and see, just all of the introductions to that Battle Royal.
Yes, yeah. Each guy gets a special their own introduction from Chris Jericho on commentary in the Battle Royal. Synclope wins. Jericho's like, what a scrub. And, of course, he unmasked to reveal himself as Dean Malenko. And just the absurdity of Dean Malenko in this get-up with the mask off, but having the full Synclope regalia still, dressed as a pumpkin, having a match with Jericho and winning the belt, getting that comeuppance. But that, of course, is not the end, because since Dean Malenko was not, I guess, officially entered into this Battle Royal, he is forced by JoJo Dillon to vacate the title on Thunder. And that was the show that I guess you attended, Andy, where Malenko, he relinquishes the belt by blasting Jericho in the face, right?
Yeah, so it's pretty cool that Steve and I got to see kind of like this early Jericho stuff. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, kind of a 1-2 punch there.
Yeah.
And they have a rematch at Great American Bash. Again, these are not like blow-away stellar matches, but just the intensity of the storyline and the characters is what really sucks you in. So this, again, I feel like had a screwy finish, like a DQ. So Jericho retains the title.
Basically, Jericho got Dean so ticked off by putting down his father that Dean Malenko just lost it on him.
Yeah.
Which is just, shows that Dean Malenko's not very smart.
Well, not saying he is, but he is the man of only 1,000 holds, and he is the Iceman. But in any case, it's sort of a shit, and this is where he starts doing the conspiracy theory stuff, right? Where he's going to petition, and he goes to Washington because Great American Bash was in Baltimore, so it had to be around that time that he was doing the stuff in D.C. outside the White House or whatever, walking around with a sign, which is just absurd, but is so quintessentially Chris Jericho. And after that, it's sort of a shame the way that this reign peters out, because Malenko then gets drawn back into the Horsemen stuff. They were like reforming, so that's kind of it for their feud. And Hoovy ends up winning the belt back from Jericho at Road Wild of '98 in somewhat anticlimactic fashion, but so be it. And after that, this sort of gets Jericho out of the Cruiserweight division, which is something you didn't see often. Guys breaking through that particular ceiling, which was a few ceilings below some other ceilings in WCW. I know he did some stuff with the TV title. Of course, he had the god-awful feud with Saturn in early '99, and he was out for the better part of that year until his debut in the WWF. But, you know, there was the aborted Goldberg thing, which I don't think really would have gone anywhere, even if Jericho did have his way there. I know I personally, as a fan, wasn't entirely buying into that stuff where Jericho was taunting Goldberg, and the big idea is Goldberg would come out, do a quickie squash, destroy him, but I don't know, it was like Bischoff didn't think Jericho was on that level, and that, you know, led to some feelings of resentment, it seemed like, and kind of a rift in their relationship. And in some ways was probably the nail in the coffin for him in WCW. But then again, I don't know. I mean, he was so successful in getting himself over at that time that I kind of wonder if he had stuck around, how much further he could have gone. Do you think he would have hit another ceiling? Any thoughts on where Jericho maybe could have gone from here?
I think Jericho has immense talent, and he's around at age 46 for a reason. I think he would have gotten around that at some point. You know, there's still a couple years of WCW to go. Mm-hmm. And with the guys he ended up having on top towards the end there, it wouldn't have been hard to believe that he would be, at the top of the company if he had stayed around for that long. I'm glad he didn't for his own pocketbook's sake, but it felt like really that, the Goldberg stuff was the last straw for him. And, you know, didn't he bring out the little person at the pay-per-view?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One of his last pay-per-views.
Oh, this Fall Brawl, I think.
Yeah.
There for quite a while into '99 after that, though, because he had Ralphus with him for a while.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
He added Ralphus to his act. He had won the TV title. I think he lost that to Conan at Starrcade in '98. Then, like I said, moved into that sort of transitional feud with Saturn. And I think he got hurt. He got like a ankle injury or something. And like I said, sat out the rest of '99 until and, you know, the writing was on the wall. Would they have been using him anyway? Who knows? Until he finally debuted in the WWF that summer. But, I mean, that's always been the big criticism, is for as great as the Cruiserweight division was, and as well as they used that mix of guys, Andy and I have talked in the past on this show about how boxed in everybody seemed to be in WCW, where the main event scene was so top heavy, where it was like all NWO all the time, plus Sting, plus Lex Luger, plus the Giant, depending on whether he was heel or face at the time, and just nobody could really break out into that scene except maybe like a Diamond Dallas Page. You know, fair enough, they were definitely holding down that fort. And I don't know that WCW, or wrestling in general, is dramatically different from like any other industry that's so heavily built on having to market and having to sell yourself, where it's sort of a shame in a way that in order to demonstrate your value to your employer, you have to actually leave that employer and go work for someone else. And who knows, perhaps if WCW was still alive today, we would have seen Jericho go back at some point and actually be pushed and treated as a main eventer, and then go back to WWE. And, you know, just that back and forth that you saw that some guys were able to do. I mean, it's kind of, like I said, unfortunate that you have to prove your worth in that way, but I don't know, it's not unique to the wrestling industry, I don't think. And I know Rey Mysterio has been very critical of the way that the cruiserweights were used in WCW, where he felt like they could just never reach that next level. Like they were good at the one thing and the one way in which they were used, and that was the only way they were ever going to be used. And Ray was a guy who did get some shine outside the division, but look what happened to him. He gets the giant killer gimmick where he gets that fluke win over Nash, and then Nash kills him at a pay-per-view and takes his mask. So I imagine he had to feel pretty salty about that. So I guess that brings me to the next point of discussion I want to throw at you guys is, do you feel like WCW really utilized the Cruiserweight division to its potential? Could they have done more with certain guys, or does it make sense that this was really the best use for them, and at the time at least maybe there wasn't room for them anywhere else? Given a few years, perhaps could have been a different story. Do you think they missed the boat on anybody?
They had so many guys that were capable of being in this division from, I'd say, like 97 to 99. And they had some more guys, towards the end, 2000, late 2000, 2001. But you think of some of the guys who we really haven't talked about, like a lot of the guys from Mexico, like, La Parka was insanely over.
Mm-hmm.
One of my guilty pleasures was Blitzkrieg, a guy who came along later. It was the California luchador who did a lot of the flipping and flopping that you see more today. And who we talked about, Silver King. I'm just going off the top of my head here. Like El Dan.
Yeah, like all the luchadors that, I don't want to just pay lip service to, but it was sort of like they brought in this huge crop of talent from Mexico, and they were pretty much there just to have good matches. They didn't do storylines with most of them until you got to the LWO stuff in late '98.
And that was short-lived too.
It was very short-lived, yes.
But can you imagine? They would use these guys a lot for TV tapings. To fill time on Nitro, like I said, by throwing them all in a match, or for house shows and Saturday night. Like they had enough guys where you could have had a whole show.
Mm-hmm.
Easily had a whole show. You could have converted one of the, you could have done an hour of, do you remember the one infamous Nitro where like the first hour was nothing but, backstage promos and NWO shirt ads?
Yes.
Like imagine if when they were experimenting with that stuff, if, their first hour was nothing but cruiserweights.
Mm-hmm.
Where you could like build towards a main event of the first hour, essentially. You had more than enough guys to be able to do that. You'd get the crowd hot, and then you'd go into your more standard, fare to build up again to your Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, Sting, Goldberg type stuff at the end of the show. So kind of like start off hot, bring it down in the middle, but then lift it up towards the end again. You could have done stuff like that. They just had so many people on the roster.
Yeah, if anything, they had too many people, and you want everybody to get something in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you want to justify that this guy is earning a potentially six-figure paycheck. It's Jim the Anvil Neidhart and Steve Mongo McMichael. I mean, you can argue whether or not they even should have been on the roster, but the fact that they're there means you should probably use them somehow.
Right.
And unfortunately, they just end up taking up time that, like you said, could have been better utilized by some better talent. And it's very telling, like, when you look at the early years of Nitro, like those fall of '95 Nitros, when I think it was just an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And even when they did go to 2 hours, it was like, it's just night and day when you compare that versus a year later when they actually have brought in the Luchadores and they've started the division where they've got the Cruiserweight Championship. You basically go from terrible, garbage, unwatchable undercard matches to like 4 at least 3-star matches per show, just all of a sudden. because you now have the talent, and it's just how you use them. Just take Juventud and Mysterio and Dragon and Malenko and Eddie and even Benoit in the early days. Any combination, Mr. JL, remember Jerry Lynn?
Yes.
Before his ECW run, he stuck around for quite a bit in WCW, in like 96 into 97, and just like I said, any combination of those guys, you've got at least 3 or 4 matches that are gonna be extremely watchable, and that happened quick. I mean, that was a big investment of talent that they made, but I feel like it had to have paid dividends, at least for me as a viewer. I don't know how well it translated in terms of ratings and buy rates and stuff like that, and merchandising, but boy, it made a way more watchable product for sure. Andy, is there anybody that any of the cruiserweights that you think they could have done more with, either in the division or just like Chris Jericho as a personality that could have been more? I don't want to steal any from you, but there is one guy that does come to mind, but I'll kick it over to you for first dibs. Anyone on your mind, Andy?
I don't know. I really liked Kidman, and I kind of liked how they did I think it was a New Blood thing. They did kind of bump him up above the cruiserweights. So.
That is true. Yeah, they tried to. I don't know. That was a little bit strange. His feud with Hogan, right, where Hogan had made some semi off the cuff or shoot comments or something about how Kidman couldn't draw flies at a shit show or something like that, and they turned it into a storyline, and it was a little bit weird seeing Kidman all of a sudden in main events against Hulk Hogan like that. However, that was still like you said, quite the bump for him. And it was something that they weren't known for doing for sure. So, and he didn't stay at that level, but he did kind of move more into the tag division with Ray. So yeah, I mean, he did get a nice little rub off of that, I feel like. Someone I think they could have done more with is Alex Wright. He was around for so long, going back to, when did he start? 94?
Yeah, he was on the very first Nitros.
Yeah.
He was on for quite a bit.
Kind of used him as a cruiserweight, but he was a bigger guy, so sometimes you saw him in there like competing for TV titles, stuff like that. And it was like they could never really figure out what they wanted him to be or how they wanted to use him. And yeah, I mean, he did trade the championship with Jericho in 97 there a bit, but I don't know. It's just, he was always such a talented guy. And
hey, I had a thought about him now.
Go for it.
Well, we were laughing about the Z-Man, Tom Zink. We're like, geez, he's on like every single 90s pay-per-view from like 90 to like 94.
He really is. He really is.
Alex Wright is like the late 90s version of the Z-Man. He's just
he's always there. And they're not doing, and they don't do anything. He's always there, yet they do nothing with him. So they did. Of course, he had the character reinvention as Berlin, which probably the less said about the better. But he's a guy that unfortunately just seemed to get lost in the shuffle. And that's really too bad. I did really like Kidman's run as champion in kind of the fall of 98, when he had just broken from the flock and won the belt from Juventud. And it seemed like Kidman and Juventud just had awesome chemistry, so they were constantly pairing them up at every possible opportunity. I can't imagine the number of matches that they had on television, let alone on house shows, just because if they were on the same card together, it seemed like they were going to have a match. And he had a good little run there. Steve, we were talking at break, going right into the end of the year at Starrcade. Kidman has been this really awesome, like, fighting champion. He goes into the last show of the year. It's a triple threat against Mysterio and Juventud, who are then members of, like we mentioned, the LWO. Successfully defends his title there, immediately is challenged by Eddie Guerrero, and they go on to have a pretty bang-up match. And I thought they could have gotten more mileage out of Kidman and Eddie just feuding. It seems like they had really just a few one-off matches like that, but they could have had a hell of a feud. Eddie worked great with everybody, and Kidman had definitely developed and matured a lot as a worker at that point. So that's one of those could have been. Anything else like that, that guys that you're surprised didn't work more together or could have had more matches, could have had really good matches that come to mind?
I'm surprised he didn't let Jerry Lynn just be Jerry Lynn and take the mask off of him.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like he was... I mean, they weren't even really portraying him as a luchador, were they?
No.
He was just Mr. JL, or simply JL.
And he had some... He'd come in and out for a while, and he was on that in '97. He was back at the Clash we talked about it previously in Milwaukee that had Malenko over Ultimo Dragon. So it wasn't. And then he goes on to ECW, becomes a champion. He's champion in Ring of Honor. He was well liked on a smaller scale before that, and his stuff I think was global with the Lightning Kid, who became 1-2-3 Kid. So yeah, that was a guy who I'm surprised they threw a mask on him and pretended he was Mexican by calling him Mr. JL.
Yeah, really inexplicable there. That's for sure. We talking about Kidman and his reign. I think he and Jericho would have had really awesome chemistry. I know like we said, Jericho was pretty much out of the division by the time Kidman had come along, but maybe Kidman being the guy to dethrone Jericho would have made more sense. I just, for some reason, could see them matching up really well, and I don't know that they ever really had any singles. I mean, maybe when Kidman was in the flock and was just getting squashed in basically every match he was in. Yeah, as a fully realized character, I don't know that Kidman and Jericho really ever paired off, which is a little bit surprising to me. In any case, moving right along, Steve, you mentioned a guy by the name of Blitzkrieg. I don't remember... Actually, I just don't know that much about Blitzkrieg in general, other than he was really awesome. What's the story with this guy? Do you know much about his background and why he just sort of was a flash in the pan, it seemed like?
I remember when he came in and really surprised by I had never heard of this guy before. I'd heard, I had seen of, matches, some of the, the other guys like La Parka, everyone kind of heard of him when he came up. And so he was kind of a surprise. And I know he was out of California. He's American, and was it mostly 99 that he was around?
Yeah, he had that awesome, that Fatal 4-Way match on a Nitro with Ray was the champion. Psychosis ended up winning. I know that because Psychosis, it was kind of surprising, got a little run with the belt there. Juventud was in the match and Blitzkrieg. So yeah, it was that 4-way on Nitro, like that spring of 99, I want to say.
Yeah, during 99, and I think I was joking with you guys a couple months ago when we started doing this. I get from this company called IVP Videos, which is really just a dude. He started making these subscription services called the Puro Box, and you get like 7 DVDs in the mail each month if you decide to do it. And one of them was usually stuff from Japan and Mexico, but he'll throw in a couple of odd and American things that he can't advertise, copyright reasons, obviously.
Yeah.
And one of them was Best of Blitzkrieg.
Just his list of tapes that are not for sale, right?
Yeah, pretty much so. Yep. And so it was just a compilation of Blitzkrieg matches from, pay-per-views, Nitro. There are a couple of like really good Saturday night ones with him and Psychosis, and he just kind of came in and out in '99. And he didn't really see him at all anymore. I don't know if he just left the business altogether, or if he was injured.
I remember this. I think it might not have been his first match in WCW, but I remember there was like they still did the week where Raw was preempted in '99, and Raw was on a Saturday that week, and so usually I was more of a Raw watcher. Well, this time I watched WCW because it was unopposed, and it was Ray and Blitzkrieg, and that might have been his debut, like in February, I think.
That could very well be. So he's only 41 years old. That seems like really young still.
It sounds like he wrestled very quick. He wrestled just in WCW 98, 99 and retired in 99.
Yes, his name is Jeremiah Ross, and per Wikipedia, Ross retired from wrestling on October 14th, this would have been 1999, in order to begin working full-time as a computer technician. Okay. I'm sure he had his reasons.
And the match, like his moves, I mentioned before, really preceded the like super athletic flip moves of today. Like his finisher was a corkscrew 450 splash. Like no one did that kind of stuff in 1999. People, just to do a 450 splash was a huge deal. And he's throwing, some twists into it. And so he would do a lot of that kind of stuff. And, he wasn't the greatest wrestler, but his moves popped people like crazy because it was something, it was almost like the Cruiserweight 2.0 for WCW. It was like next level.
Very much ahead of his time. And he had that killer match with Hoovy at Spring Stampede where I think the finish is Juventud hits him with the Hoovy driver off the top rope, which looks just brutal. And that's, I think, the match people think of when if they remember anything from Blitzkrieg, it's probably that match from a really, really awesome show, pay-per-view in 99. And there were not many in that year.
And one of my favorite parts of watching this compilation of Blitzkrieg matches was seeing the vintage WCW airs, where like each week they'd spell his name differently. Like they couldn't figure out how they wanted to spell it. So you'd have it like the I before E, like the way it's supposed to be, but some weeks it would be E before I. Sometimes they will like try to do fancy spellings of it to like make it stand out. They just couldn't figure out what they wanted to call him.
Didn't quite crack the code there.
No.
Now, it is shortly after this that the wheels fall off the bus of the Cruiserweight division. Steve, what happened? When did it all go to hell?
I think it went to hell after like Lenny Lane. I don't think when like Standards and Practices got involved, right?
Yeah,
they became characters, but they became and Lenny Lane wasn't a bad wrestler.
No.
Identical looking to Chris Jericho, and they even used that in an angle at some point with Jericho during the aforementioned run, I think, with Malenko.
Lenny, he wore Juventud's mask, which Jericho would do from time to time, but he kept it on for the duration of this match, so everyone thought that it was Jericho defending the title against somebody like Prince Iaukea, somebody, who knows. And he unmasked, it's Lenny Lane. And I mean, credit to him, he definitely pulled it off, because like you said, he was spitting image of Jericho and managed to wrestle like him as well in this match.
And he later won. He really beat Rey Mysterio for the title.
I know.
And then he was stripped shortly thereafter for his homosexual gimmick, which, to be fair, it really wasn't like, in typical wrestling fashion, it was like insinuated. Like it wasn't much different than Gorgeous George in the 50s.
Right.
And like he would suck on a lollipop and have silly hairstyles, pretty much.
And it was certainly a far cry from Gold Dust.
Right.
Especially the early Gold Dust stuff, which was, a good, 4 years before this.
Correct.
And, yeah, like you said, Lenny Lane, he was that flamboyant, very camp character, but this is Turner Broadcasting standards and practices, I suppose.
Right. And professional wrestling, and throwing a little bit of shade here, but professional wrestling based out of the South.
Yes.
And this is still at this point, 17 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But this is when, basically, within the next few months, they started doing the musical chairs where, Disco Inferno got it, and, Disco, no Cruiserweight when you're comparing him to Dean Malenko, Dragon, Mysterio.
Yeah.
And then you had the Evan Courageous Medusa love situation with Medusa winning it. And then I believe you guys talked about Oklahoma, and it might have been the first episode, right?
Yes.
Ed Ferrara.
We have talked Oklahoma at some point. And Evan Courageous and Medusa, he was like her boy toy kind of thing. I guess that's what they were going for. And Oklahoma, yeah, won the belt from Medusa at Sold Out, then vacated. The Artist, you remember The Artist?
Yes. Well, that was Prince Iakea.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And that was when I started, as I said at the top, the Cruiserweights really brought me into Nitro. And when they started pulling this stuff, this is when I stopped watching WCW.
Yeah, this is bad. I mean, looking at this, you do have a Chris Candido reign in there, but I believe that was the infamous, I don't know that it was the Cruiserweight title, but he had a match with Terry Funk, I think for the Hardcore title, that took place largely in a horse stable, and one of them either does or almost gets kicked in the head by a horse.
Oh.
Or possibly does a moonsault off of a horse. Somebody's got to back me up on this.
I don't remember this, but
it was on Thunder. It was on Thunder.
Yeah, I don't doubt it.
Yeah, you wouldn't have seen it. But yeah, there is a horse stable hardcore match between Chris Candido and Terry Funk. I swear I'm not imagining it. It sounds like a fever dream, but it's not.
Yeah, there's 2000 was not a good year.
Crowbar and Daphne won it together. Then I guess Daphne won it from herself and Crowbar. This is just absurd. Lieutenant Loco. Ooh, that was Chavo. Mm-hmm.
And when they turned Booker T into GI Bro and Huge Erection, and it was below sophomoric.
Yeah, that was not there's bad WCW that's funny to look back on and laugh at and make fun of, and then there's just bad WCW that's stupid and depressing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the Misfits in Action epitomized to me. You did have Lance Storm coming into the picture there, but that was when they had him holding all the singles championships. So here again, it's more of a storyline driven element than anything else. He pawns it off to Elix Skipper, whom I remember basically nothing of.
Well, he is more known, and this is where you start getting a lot of the guys who ended up in the initial run of TNA, like Elix Skipper, mostly known for his time in Team Sex, because he still had Vince Russo around. One of the more famous TNA matches was when he did a Hurricane Rana. Might have been on Christopher Daniels. I don't recall precisely, but off of the top of the cage, which was this crazy move. And our buddy Andrew Reich, who's a huge fan
didn't
of
he
2001.
Didn't he run the edge of the cage and then jump off or something? Okay, I do remember.
Yeah, it was jumped off with a Hurricane Rana. Mm-hmm. But you started seeing those guys start to appear around this time, your Jason Jett was one. It was like 2001, right? Like,
yes, this is when they decided to actually
money.
They decided to do something with the belt again and have real matches. So you had Air Styles, remember AJ Styles?
Yeah.
Coming in, and it was Air Styles and who was Air
Paris?
And they were they even were a tag team for a while, Air Raid.
And I know like Christopher Daniels came in for a few matches here and there.
Yes, and almost, isn't that where he almost broke his head off trying like a springboard moonsault and landed directly on the back of his head?
On the floor, I believe, right?
Something like that. Oof, that was scary. All right, Air Paris is Frank Paris. I don't think he's otherwise or better known as anyone else. I don't know why I was thinking he was, but I remember that name surfacing in 2001.
And that's when AJ came in, that was all they could really show of his past, was like those couple of moments in WCW.
Yeah, that's really funny. It was only a spell, because it really was those first, maybe the last month of 2000 and 3 months of 2001, and that was it. I think at this point it was Chavo who had the actual title pretty well locked up. He had a good little run there, actually, and that was maybe the best Chavo ever looked as a singles guy. Probably the peak of him just as a performer, and Sugar Shane Helms ended up taking the belt off of him at the very last WCW pay-per-view at what was it, Andy? WCW Sloth, I believe.
Avarice.
Yes. WCW Gluttony.
I didn't remember they actually called one Super Brawl Revenge.
Yeah, Super Brawl Revenge. And those last 3 shows were pretty good, actually. But I've said enough about that, the declining days of WCW and how they actually seemed like they were turning it around, turning a corner.
Oh, yeah. You talk about that every show. You want to talk about Kevin Sullivan booking, too?
I was just mentioning. Hey, I didn't bring it up this time. You did.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and what's interesting about, Cruiserweight and WCW, you still got guys who are around. A lot of these guys are still around today. And people would always say, hey, if they continue this style, they're never going to last. But, Chavo still wrestling. Not good, but still wrestling.
Yeah.
Ray still wrestling. Kidman's an agent. I'm trying to think who, AJ, obviously. Jamie Noble still involved as an agent. A lot of these guys, that were in WCW towards the end years are still very much prevalent on the scenes in wrestling in some way. Shane Helms, still involved in TNA.
And even like Psychosis, I know it was like 10 years ago now, but he came over with that trio, wasn't it? Hoovy and like Super Crazy. So
Yes. So racist. So racist.
Yeah, well, again, it is wrestling. You have to lower the bar quite a bit. Now, they did try again, in the very last month of WCW's existence, do you remember the Cruiserweight Tag Team Championship?
Yes.
And so who actually won that? It was Eel Skipper, right? Mm-hmm. And Kid Romeo, whom I also know nothing about, and probably popped up in TNA at some point. And they flipped the titles to Ray and Kidman on the very last Nitro, but that was a championship that WWF did not pick up when they acquired the assets of World Championship Wrestling. Oh well, what could have been.
What's interesting about it is the actual belt only lasted for 8 days.
Yeah.
Or 9 days.
Right.
Because they had the tournament going on for a while, for a few weeks, but then it just ended.
Yep.
And again, good guys. 3 count. Air Raid, Filthy Animals, Kidman and Mysterio, some team I've never heard of, that Jason B and Scotty O. Young Dragons.
Right. I mean, they had guys who were primarily known for competing in tag teams who would occasionally get the singles title shot, but when they realized, hey, we've got a lot of great tag teams, and by the way, they happen to be cruiserweights, why don't we try to capitalize on that? So it made sense, but they just couldn't get any traction with it, of course. Well, we've run through the history, which I'm surprised we were able to do. At this point, maybe let's just do some quick hits, like a little lightning round here. Steve, your very favorite WCW Cruiserweight match, if it isn't Ray and Eddie at Havoc, is there another one that just springs to mind?
Man, see, again, there's some of the early Ray Psychosis ones where they just really let themselves go. Like I have no idea how Psychosis is still alive with some of the crash landings he would do, or
you're right.
Just such a pretty top rope leg drop that like had to wreck his spine every time he landed on his ass.
God, yeah, it hurts just looking at it. I was gonna say exactly the same. Their first match at in WCW at, I guess it was at Bash at the Beach '96, which I had seen but just hadn't rewatched in years up until probably a few nights ago, and I was just astonished. I know that they had done a lot of great work in ECW, and admittedly, I don't even think I've seen all of those matches, but I would have to think this was on par with that, because it really, really blew me away, even watching through 2016 Ice. So yeah, I would say exactly the same. Andy, is there any one particular match or series of matches that comes to mind for you?
Well, I guess not counting Ultimo and Malenko, and then we're not going to count the Halloween Havoc 97 match.
You can if you want.
I'll go the year prior. Halloween Havoc 96. I'd never seen this pay-per-view before, and now that I have the network, I'm going to take advantage of it. Watched Dean Malenko against Rey Mysterio, and I know they had previous matches on my Nitros and pay-per-views, but this one, it seemed really cool to me, and Malenko was just like, he was really like laying into him, because like Ray would do all these flips and stuff, Malenko was like swatting him off.
Yeah, just cutting him off. Malenko was a monster in that match.
And then I made some note. I actually like typed this up, and I don't remember why it was, but I put some dude is at ringside wearing a sweatshirt with an airbrush Papa Shango.
It was Justin Rosero.
Busted. We found videographic evidence of Todd Weber acting a fool at one of these shows. Now we have JT. So add it to the archives.
And the Andrew Reich one that we found from the Slam
Yeah,
booth.
just recently, Andrew Reich putting hands to Jimmy Hart, getting swatted away. Do you have back to you, Steve, a favorite championship reign? That might be a layup as well.
Yeah, it's Jericho.
Gotta be Jericho,
for me.
right?
Yeah, with the Juventud and Dean Malenko stuff.
I will give honorable mention to Kidman winning the title as he did. Again, breaking off from the flock like that and having to really just, all their matches were good, but that may have been the best that he had against Hoovy on that Nitro, winning the title finally, and just having a really long run where, like I said, he was just a fighting champion and was more fully realized and finally fleshed out as a character. He's apparently off the drugs too. He wasn't scratching himself as he was, and his finisher was no longer the 7-year itch. It's now Shooting Star Press. So I don't know. That's what I read into that gimmick when he was in the flock. Am I reading too much into that, Steve?
No, I think that was what they were getting at without actually saying it.
They were insinuating it, right?
Yeah, at first I just thought he was dirty and needed a shower. But,
Right, yeah, that's what they said, but come on. Andy, favorite reign?
Well, I will lean over to the Chris Jericho side. I have to say that one because the first 6 months of 1998, you just had like the rise of Goldberg. Then you had like Sting as a champion. You had DDP coming up through the ranks, and he'd eventually become feuding with Raven and stuff. And it's just Jericho had his run, so it was like all this stuff was going on, and it's kind of like a credit to him that he was able to kind of really find his niche there too.
Yeah, that's a good point. It was a crowded field of all new champions starting in early '98, and you're right. And Jericho easily could have gotten sort of lost in the mix there, since, as you said, there was Goldberg's ascension, Sting finally gets a run with the belt, DDP, but yeah, cruiserweight division under Jericho was popping. I guess one last lightning round question for you guys. Just favorite overall performer as a cruiserweight in WCW, whether he was ever champion or not, outside of favorite matches, just favorite performer.
One of my, I think if I got rid of Jericho's one of my favorites of all time. Dean Malenko, I really always enjoyed, who was mostly a cruiserweight during his time. Another underrated guy would be La Parka, who just was funny. Mm-hmm. just pretty funny.
And just wiping guys out with the chair. Even if they were on his own team, he would just lay everybody out after the match.
It was kind of like the antithesis to the cruiserweight division. He was in it, but you're not seeing him do a lot of stuff.
No. And he was he had kind of the skinny fat guy thing going on a little bit, where sure he qualified as a cruiserweight, but he had some meat on his bones, and like you said, he wasn't doing the real high flying stuff, but awfully charismatic, got over with the crowd really organically. So yeah, he definitely deserves a shout out. Andy, favorite cruiserweight?
Well, since you mentioned La Parka, the one thing I have to say, with La Parka that I thought was really cool was that time where it was Macho Man against La Parka, and he was kind of treating it like a blow-off match. EDP the whole time. I thought that was real cool. Mm-hmm. But I guess
it was always EDP.
Wouldn't that be something? Yeah.
I'd have to go with Eddie Guerrero, because like when Tim and I were texting and talking about matches, I'd always seem to overlook Eddie Guerrero, which seems like stupid to me, but I'd always talk about Ultimo Dragon or Malenko or Jericho or even Kidman, and I'd always overlook Eddie Guerrero. So I guess I have to say that he's probably the best performer in that division.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, Eddie is kind of, in a way, an easy answer in that you don't often think of him as just a pure cruiserweight. He's another dude like Dean, moved in and out of the division sometimes, but man, when he was on, he was freaking on. And you listen to guys today who talk about who influenced them, growing up, learning their trade, and almost everybody says Eddie Guerrero. Cruiserweight or not, in all honesty, he's really reached that upper echelon of all-time great. And maybe part of that is just the legend of him being taken from us too soon. So, there's the argument that we never really got the chance to take him for granted or witness some kind of fall from grace or anything like that. I mean, he really went out on top, but he did, I think, that just the best pure work of his career in ring in WCW during this time period of late 95 through 99, thereabouts. He's a guy that, if it can be done in a wrestling ring, he can do it. And if he can't do it, then it's just straight up not possible. I mean, that guy could do anything in the ring. I truly believe that. So hands down for me, easy choice, Eddie Guerrero. And he's, over the years, I've found myself in thinking who my just personal favorites of all time are in wrestling, and he's just kind of slowly been working his way up the list for me. But man, and God, when he came back in '99 after his car accident, so it was like New Year's Day, he wraps his car around a tree, and supposedly there's rumors going around that's the end of his career. He'll be lucky to walk again, all this stuff. And he's back in top form within, I want to say 6 months, 6 or 7 months. Is absolutely jacked to the gills. I'm sure, the steroids played a role in that, but no denying that he looked the best that he ever had up to that point in his career, and was just on another level. And that's when I really and truly became an Eddie Guerrero mark, was that 99 comeback where it was like all of a sudden, oh, this is Eddie? Wow, he's just taking it to another level here. And there was kind of no looking back after that. I had to go back and gain a new appreciation for his earlier work that Andy, just like you said, I knew was always good, but hadn't really given it the credit that it deserved.
And for me, he's so transcendent. I don't even really think of him as a cruiserweight sometimes. When I'm thinking about cruiserweight, I'm thinking of, the lighter guys. And for me, he was always just a star.
Yeah, easy to see. And someone, here again, WCW could have done a lot more with. And you think if they were still around today, him leaving might have forced their hand and made them appreciate what they had lost. Just goes to show. But in any case, is there anything else that you feel like we didn't cover here, Steve? Any potpourri that you'd like to give a shout out to or mention?
No, nothing I think of. I think we did a fairly comprehensive look at some of the lows and highs of of the cruiserweight division, and really overall, it did launch my wrestling fandom into another sphere, I'd say, where that led me to start looking for tapes and finding the When Worlds Collide WCW Mexico pay-per-view that introed Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero to American audiences, and check out the Super J Cup stuff that had happened a couple of years ago with Benoit and Guerrero and Malenko and Jericho and their stuff in Japan. And it really kind of launched my fandom to another, like I said, another sphere, which got me into ECW later on and more of the independent stuff. And, they're the ones that I can thank for that.
Absolutely. And just a key component in differentiating the two companies, the big two, during the height of the Monday Night Wars. It was something that you could only find in WCW. And they knew it, and I think they did a fairly decent job capitalizing on it. You could always do better in hindsight, sure, 2020 being all that, but it was just something different that if you wanted to see high-profile cruiserweight wrestling, you basically had to watch, in North America anyway, you had to watch WCW. Andy, anything we're overlooking here? Anything you want to give a special shout-out to?
I don't have any cruiserweight shout-outs or anything to make note of, but I want to say, Steve, thanks for coming on the show, but also I think I'm coming up on a year as part of the Nation, Place to Be Nation, and I think that you played a big part in bringing me on, so I want to thank you for that too.
Oh, of course. I try to get a lot of people involved under the radar. I don't know if the bigwigs realized my behind the scenes stuff that I was trying to I got Glenn in too, and I was trying to get all the cool people in from from the old blog of doom, because I know that's really what it is. It's like kind of building a community that we've had, like, the three of us for, gosh, what, 10 years? It's been a long time.
Yeah. Hard to believe. Not so much me. I didn't come into the picture and start, conversing with you guys until probably 2010 thereabouts. But you all have more history than I do, and it probably is 10 years, right?
Yeah. See, here's the thing: is like I don't really have Facebook right away, and I wasn't on MySpace, but like everybody on the blog of Doom was really like my friends at a point in my life where I really didn't have any friends at all. So it's like I feel like all of you guys are like my true like close friends. So I actually was really sad when the blog died, and I was more of a jerk than usual. And I think that's because I was sad, but I didn't want that to end. But now it seems like it's just like an evolution of that with the Place to Be, because now it's not like we're just talking on a computer. We're talking on podcasts, and we've even had meetups. So I think that's just like, there's really nothing to be sad about. It was just a process of everything. Things change. So I think it changed for the better.
Yeah.
It's more phenomenal.
And Scott Keith's not involved in any of this stuff, so who needs him?
Oh, shit.
Buried.
That's a shoot, brother. Pulling the curtain back a little bit. In any case, Steve, I want to thank you as well for coming on to the show. I'm glad we picked a topic that seemed pretty near and dear to your heart, but like I said, mainly we just wanted to get you on here because you are the jam up guy that you are, and we certainly would love to have you back. The door is always open. We would extend that to all two of our guests so far. So you are an elite company.
Excellent.
But, we would definitely love to have you back. Don't want to keep you for too much longer here tonight. So do want to thank you again so much for taking the time. Tell all the folks listening where they can find you and when they can find you.
My main project that I've been doing right now is Clotheslines and Headlines, which is a look at the kind of just a wraparound of what's going on in the world of wrestling. We do a little WWF, but the reason I wanted to get involved with it was kind of look at Ring of Honor, New Japan, talk to some of my buddies who are a little bit more intertwined in the world of wrestling. And that's JT, myself, and Nate Milton, who I truly believe is one of the best podcasters in the business. The guy's voice is incredible. He's got a lot of really just good stuff. And at some point, the guy's got to get some sort of big time broadcasting gig because he's that good.
And he's got to get on this show too because we're big fans of Nate Milton.
He's a WCW and TNA guy, so I bet he would.
Yep, yeah, I know he is, and he's not too far from my neck of the woods either. He's in like the Newport News, kind of Norfolk area, I want to say, and I'm in Central Virginia in Richmond, so he's only about an hour out from me. So, sure, he hit up the Norfolk Scope for some shows back in the day, no doubt.
And the other thing I do is from time to time we do the live watches, which spun up from the main podcast, and we'll have to get you guys on that too. Our last one actually has had more hits than like any of the other podcasts in the feed for the last few months. We just found that out this week, where it was just Glenn Butler, myself, and Jordan Duncan looking at this ridiculously stupid Japan camping wrestling that happened at a campground. It had Kota Ibushi and Kenny Omega in it, and it was the most absurd thing I've done with wrestling in 10 years, and I'm a huge fan of absurd humor. So
yeah, you got to get on some Chris Candido, Terry Funk horse stable matches now.
Yes, that sounds like a must win, a must watch for me.
And all the more reason for Thunder to be added to the network.
Yes.
So, all right, well, Clotheslines and Headlines, a show. I think of that as being the correspondence show from, like you said, the different corners of wrestling. So that's always an interesting and informative listen for me. Highly recommend if you have not checked out that show to do so on the Place to Be Nation wrestling feed. So again, Steve, thank you so much for being here. It looks like once again, folks, we are desperately out of time. We will be with you again next month. Until then, enjoy dinner and a movie with Paul and Annabelle. I understand this week they'll be watching Requiem for a Dream. So sounds
and
like
I'll be watching Annabelle.
Take care, folks. For Tim Capel, I'm Tim Capel. For Andy Helene, we will see you next month.
Goodbye!